So today we are discussing the concept of afterlife in Hellenistic philosophy. The concept of spiritual immortality, it will be the same as the idea of spiritual immortality in ancient Greek philosophy. Our main thinker for today is Cicero. But before we discuss Cicero's life and his arguments for the immortality of the soul, I have to introduce to you this whole brand of philosophy, which is called Hellenistic philosophy, to which Cicero belonged. Let's start with some general remarks about Hellenistic culture. What is Hellenistic culture? Here we have to move to politics just for a moment, although I do not like to discuss politics. Alexander the Great had created an empire that extended from Greece to India and spread Greek ideas and culture from the Eastern Mediterranean to Asia. So it is Alexander the Great who is the founder of the Hellenistic Empire and the Hellenistic culture. This era is called the Hellenistic period. It lasted until 31 BC, when Romans conquered the territories of Alexander's empire. A couple of words about Alexander the so-called Great. I don't think emperors should be called great. To build an empire means to perpetuate violence, military conquests, murder of people, and all of this in the name of simply enlarging the territory that you control. Where is greatness is that? I have no idea. Alexander, though, was a unique individual. His tutor was Aristotle, and Aristotle was one of the greatest philosophers of all time. Alexander of Macedonia, or Alexander the Great, as we know him from history, was a person who was dreaming of some great heroic exploits and deeds. Every night he was sleeping with Homer's poem Iliad under his pillow. So he was a hero. He tried to realize his dreams. He created a great empire, and then he died. But after he died, as I said, his legacies continued. And we are interested not so much in his political legacy, but in his cultural legacy, in the Hellenistic culture, and more specifically in the Hellenistic philosophy. So there were four schools of philosophy that were flourishing in those days. The first school was the school of the Academy, that was founded by Plato, and that we briefly discussed in our last lecture. The second school was called Peripatetics. It was the school founded by Aristotle, the teacher, the tutor of Alexander the Great. Aristotle also is known for creating the Aristotelian logic, the classical logic that would survive without any substantial change for thousands of years. The third school of thought was called Stoicism. The school of Stoicism was founded by Zeno of Citium. Do not confuse him with Xena, the warrior princess. We will be talking about Zeno and the philosophy of Stoicism. And the fourth school of thought was called Epicureans. This school was founded by Epicurus. First, let's talk about Zeno of Citium and the Stoic philosophy. Now, remember, I told you that the city prison of Athens, where Socrates supposedly spent the last days or months of his life, was located near the Agora. The Agora was the marketplace in Athens, and Zeno delivered his talks from the Stoa, which was an arcaded freestanding porch in the Agora in Athens. And the marketplace in Athens was not only for buying food, groceries, etc. It was also for discussing various subjects with people, including philosophical subjects. And that's how Zeno was promoting his philosophy. Stoics regarded philosophy as a way of life and the practice of self-transformation. Here also, I want to make some comments. It is one of the great advantages of ancient and classical philosophy that philosophy was usually regarded not as theoretical discipline that is confined to the universities. Philosophy was regarded as a practical tool of self-transformation and self-betterment, kind of a self-help discipline. And that's why philosophy was very influential in society. According to Stoicism, the goal of human life was happiness. And I think in all classical philosophy, that is the goal of human life. The main problem is how do we understand happiness? And various philosophers understood happiness in a very different way. So according to Stoicism, happiness could only be achieved by the cultivation of virtue. Stoicism was a religious philosophy. Stoics believed in God, and maintained that every human being has a divine spark in them, something that today we call the soul or the spirit. They identified the moral virtues with knowledge, and therefore the perfection of our rational natures. So Stoics were rationalists, and the strength of their philosophy, the strength of their philosophical approach was in their focus on moral virtues. According to Stoicism, all human beings were equal, and society should be ordered based on their universal partnership or brotherhood. That was another strong point of Stoicism. Stoics did not shelter themselves from participating in social life, including politics, but they believed that politics should be based on virtue and that society should be based on the principle of equality. Now let me say a couple of words about Epicurus and Epicureanism. Epicureanism was an ancient form of atheism. The ontological views of Epicurus are very similar to our contemporary scientific worldview. According to Epicurus, nature is but a flash of atoms let loose in a void. Nature is both without meaning and without malice. Epicurus also believed that human soul is composed of atoms and therefore does not survive the death of the physical body. Now, gods, if they existed at all, Epicurus believed, do not intervene into human affairs and do not punish or reward humans for their behavior. Now, I have to say that Epicurus was not a militant atheist. From what we know, he was a nice, very good person who valued friendship more than anything else, who taught in his gardens. So he was very friendly, very good guy, and he encouraged people to get involved in religion, in religious worship, if they want to. He simply believed that whether God existed or God or gods did not exist, our destiny, our life, should not be subordinated to their will, to the will of gods, to the idea of punishment and reward. Now, we will move further and you will understand why he held such views. Now, the main problem of human life for Epicurus was human anxiety. And that may sound very, very familiar to us in 21st century America, where so many people have problems with mental health, and especially emotional problems, like the problem with anxiety or the problem of depression. Epicurus thought that the primary cause of human anxiety is the fear of death. Now, why the fear of death? Because people are afraid of the prospect of punishment in the afterlife. So that's why Epicurus thought that it is very important not to believe that gods intervene in human affairs. Even if God existed, they will not punish you or will not reward you. Your life is the product of your own choices. Also, that's why I think he believed that the soul does not survive the death of the physical body. Because if you cease to exist after you die, then you will not be afraid of punishments in the afterlife. So I think his atheism was not so much an ideological position, but simply a strategy, a therapeutic strategy for people who are obsessed with the fear of death. Now, according to Epicurus, the goal of human life is to alleviate mental anxiety and to achieve this tranquil state of mind, which he called ataraxy. That was the main goal of this school of philosophy. And Epicurus thought that this tranquil state of mind is the foundation of happiness. And personally, I would agree with that. So to accomplish that goal, humans should withdraw from society and avoid the torments of competition and desire. Epicurus thought that people should withdraw from politics, they should withdraw from social life, from the struggle for social status, for career, for money. They should avoid all this because that will give you nothing but trouble. And for Epicurus, like for Zeno, philosophy was not simply a theoretical discipline, but a form of therapy for the soul. As I told you, he taught in his Athenian garden and valued friendship more than anything else. And here is one quotation, was one famous quotation from Epicurus. Death, the most terrifying of evils, is nothing to us. For as long as we exist, death is not present with us. And when death comes, then we no longer exist. Epicurus thought that this quotation will calm our minds, but here I personally disagree. If you believe that as long as we exist, death is not present, but when we die, we no longer exist, I don't think your mind will become calmer. Because here comes another fear, the fear of non-existence. And the fear of non-existence is as strong as the fear of punishment after death. So now we move on to our main thinker, Marcus Tullius Cicero, who was born in 106 before Christ, who died in 43 before Christ as well. Cicero was a great thinker, but not only a great philosopher, but also he was an orator, a lawyer, a politician, and his life coincided with the decline and fall of the Roman Republic. Now, Cicero was not a philosopher. First of all, he was a politician. His main concern was political. He was an ardent defender of the Roman Republic, and he witnessed the deterioration of this republic. His main concern was about how to make sure that the republic survives. Cicero believed that the strength of the Roman Republic was in virtue. And he thought that virtue is connected with religion. Cicero believed that the Roman people are very religious, extremely religious, and he thought that because of that, the Roman Republic was able to withstand so many obstacles and could survive. So his philosophical works are also practical. They have practical task of trying to influence the Roman elite to come back to virtue, to accept philosophy that will uplift their spirit. So he always subordinated his philosophy to political action. And in fact, he wrote his philosophical works only when he was either exiled because of his political views, or when he would withdraw from society because of his personal tragedies. In other words, he would write philosophical works when he was not available as a politician, as a lawyer, etc. So up until the 19th century, Cicero was considered one of the greatest Western philosophers. But since the 19th century, his fame as a philosopher declined. Nowadays, his philosophy is considered non-original and eclectic. And therefore, we do not read Cicero usually in our humanity courses in the American universities. Now, my personal opinion is that his philosophy is superb, although, yes, it is eclectic, which means that he takes various positions from different schools. He subscribes to some positions, he rejects other positions, but he does not have his original philosophical ideas. He does not have his system of philosophy. That's true. But nevertheless, his arguments are superb, and I think he is a great philosopher. In terms of his allegiance, he professed to be the member of the academy. He thought of himself as part of the Platonic school of philosophy. But since philosophy for him was not the primary occupation, he was very flexible and also incorporated into his philosophy some Stoic ethical teachings that he wanted the Roman elite to adopt. Why so? Because the academy in his time professed skepticism. And skepticism means the rejection of truth and basically withdrawal from social and political life because of that. Cicero was not satisfied with this social position of the academy. And although he liked the metaphysical position, belief in the creator, belief in the immortality of the soul, for example, he did not like social passivity. So therefore, he used some of the Stoic teachings for two reasons. First reason is this focus on ethics that was very, very dear to Cicero himself. And also, he liked Stoics because they thought that people should get involved in social life and politics. And that also was very close to Cicero's own views. The end of Cicero's life was tragic. He was trying to defend the Republic, but he failed. Cicero was murdered for his defense of the Republic, and his head and hands were cut off and nailed to the speaker's podium in the Senate as a warning to others. But still, his fame survived. We still remember him as a person who defended Republic against tyranny. And in this particular lecture, we are going to discuss his arguments for the immortality of the soul. The arguments are taken from his book, Tusculan Disputations. So let me tell you a little bit about the origin of this book. So when Cicero was 62 years old, his daughter Tullia died in childbed, and Cicero was heartbroken. He retired from all his social and political duties, and he came to one of his estates, the Tusculan villa. He invited his friends to be his companions so that they could console him. During 5 days, they talked about death, about grief, about life in general. And as a result of these conversations, Cicero wrote his book, Tusculan Disputations. In the first chapter of this book, when Cicero discusses the subject of death and is trying to convince his interlocutors that death is not evil, but in fact death can be seen from the positive perspective. In this first chapter of the book, Cicero summarizes his arguments for the immortality of the soul. Now, since Cicero himself was not a systematic philosopher, he did not have his particular philosophical system, the arguments that he is presenting in this first chapter of the book, Tusculan Disputations, are not connected with any specific philosophy. We've seen in Plato, for example, that at least two of his arguments are specifically tied to his philosophical views, to the theory of forms, and to Plato's belief in reincarnation. It's very different for Cicero. Cicero's arguments come from everyday experience and our sensory perception. Cicero presents more arguments or proofs of the immortality of the soul than Socrates in Plato's dialogue, Phaedo. In this lecture, I will simply describe those arguments one by one, and the arguments are arranged in a logical way. So the first argument is the argument from tradition. Number one, there was never a nation in the world that did not believe in gods and the afterlife. Number two, all people cannot be wrong all the time. Number three, therefore, life after death must exist in reality. The second argument that I would call argument from experience. The first premise, we lament the loss of our friends when they die. But number two, no one is afflicted merely on the account of a loss sustained by himself, because we lament the loss of our friends because our friends cannot share with us the pleasures of life and life experiences that we have after they die. Therefore, number three, we believe that the dead person is sensible of his loss. And conclusion follows that therefore life after death exists. Next argument is the argument from consent. The first premise is that people would not sacrifice their lives unless they firmly believe in immortality. If they do not believe in immortality, to sacrifice your life will be foolish. However, and here comes the second premise, people do encounter death for their country, for example, in military fights. Therefore, as a conclusion, life continues after death. Next argument is the argument from nature. Cicero says that everybody is anxious about the things which concern future life. That is certainly true. But if there is no life after death, why worry? Therefore, he concludes, nature itself gives a silent judgment in favor of the immortality of the soul. Next argument proceeds from the powers of the soul. The major premise is we cannot see the soul, but we are aware of its powers, and therefore are convinced of its existence. Number two, the powers of the soul, volition, memory, and understanding, indicate that they are not of material nature. Therefore, as Cicero concludes, the true nature of the soul is heavenly, and by definition, eternal. Next argument is from divine origin. Whatever we experience in the world could not be affected without a God. Hence, the origin of the soul is divine, and therefore the soul survives death and is immortal. And here we conclude our lecture about Hellenistic philosophy and Cicero. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.